We are now in broadcast mode. Devin is in. I'm promoting him to a panelist. Hello, folks. We'll get started shortly. We are just gathering.
There you go, honey. There you go.
Good afternoon, folks. We're still gathering. We will get started shortly. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Black Futurist Group works daily to dismantle the harm that is caused by the lack of government intervention, the lack of resources, the lack of innovative policy, and the lack of a table that truly centers the needs of Black and Brown people as it pertains to how we move our society towards bending towards the moral arc of justice, as Dr. King once spoke of. And so I'm excited to serve as a moderator for this series over the next 6 weeks. And this session today is really exciting because some of my favorite people in the world are on this panel. And so I'm excited for you to hear from them and to ask some questions and for us to engage in a really robust discussion that I know will also yield results beyond this particular conversation because it is being recorded. So all of my panelists, be mindful that you're being recorded, including myself. You know, I like to talk a little crazy every now and again, but it's all in fun. And so if we could progress on to the next slide. And let's get into our panelists for this civil and human rights discussion. And so our first panelist is Sophie Cash, and I'm going to allow each panelist to introduce themselves briefly, just as I did, because I'm sure there's much more that we can know about you beyond what is shared in your bio.
Thank you, Devin, and thank you, Malcolm and Thrive SS. I want to echo what Devin, the thanks that Devin extended to Thrive SS for gathering us in this, and for launching this series of really important topics and conversations. My name is Sophie Cash, like Devin mentioned. My pronouns are she and her. I'm originally Lebanese. I've been in the United States since 2016. On asylum, pending asylum, unfortunately still. And I am currently working as a program coordinator for the Positively Trans program at the Transgender Law Center. Yeah, and I'm just really glad to be here. Yeah, can we maybe move to the next slide?
Thank you. And we also want to send love to the people of Lebanon right now. We know there's a lot going on. So we want to send you love, and we want to send love to your folks there because we know that there's conflict and drama all over the world in 2020. That seems to be the theme. But as LGBTQ people, as Black people, as people of color, we know resiliency better than anybody else does. And we know that there will be better times than this. So we just send in love to you and your families and friends back in Lebanon.
Thank you.
If we could go to the next slide. And also I would like to ask all speakers who are not currently speaking, if you could mute yourself, that would be great. Kyla Gore, are you, I know your camera said, you said you were giving some, your camera was giving some issues. Is your microphone working?
No, I think my camera is fine.
Okay, great. Well, please introduce yourself.
Awesome. Kayla Gore, pronouns are she and her. I'm based in Memphis, Tennessee. I am currently the Southern Regional Organizer with the Transgender Law Center. I'm also the co-founder of my sister's house here in Memphis, which is an emergency shelter for trans women. We've been in existence since 2017. We're now in the midst of a tiny house project where we plan to build and give 20 Black and brown trans women tiny homes for home ownership. Yeah, and we're like at $300,000 of a $450,000 goal. So yeah, we're super excited. It's super busy here. All of the things. That's my bio. But yeah, I don't want to take up too much time talking about me because the conversation that we're about to embark on is very important. And it's dear to myself, and I'm pretty sure all the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyla. And another thing, I just want to give a shout out. One, I think it's amazing that Black trans women and trans women of color are not waiting for the government to intervene. You are like the second or third group of trans women of color who have raised resources to provide housing directly without any government funds. Here in Atlanta, Solutions Not Punishment Collaborative, led by Tony Michelle Williams, has also raised an incredible amount of money and is launching their own housing initiative as well. And so I'm just really proud of all of my sisters in the work, including you. And also shout out to Memphis, because y'all know how to deal with street racers. In Atlanta, we like locking up people for like even watching street racing. And y'all have like a whole TV show on Discovery that I watch with like white folks called Outlaws. It's really interesting in America. Shout out to Memphis. Let's go to the next slide. Marco and your beautiful cat.
Yeah, my cat is in a little place where he can let me work for a little bit. I wanted to first appreciate the invitation to be in this panel. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can see you. Yep.
I cannot see myself, but it's good. I wanted to say that I'm a filmmaker. I have a film that is a documentary film, a feature length on family acceptance, and it's called The Song of the Hummingbird. You can actually find it in Amazon, or if you have no money, you can send me an email and I'll send you a copy. My film tackles dismantle the premise that Latinx men are homophobic or transphobic by nature, and they show their love for their children in this film. But I also work on HIV for many years, since the 90s, and the project that I wanted to share with you right now is HIV Racial Justice Now. It's a project that we put together, about 20 of us, activists of color or organizers of color from the HIV movement, and we created and wrote a framework that is actually in our website. And this framework invites and our premise is that we cannot end HIV if we don't use a racial justice framework. And that is a project that I'm very proud of. And I invite you all to search for HIV Racial Justice Now, and I'll share the framework in the chat box. Thanks.
Thank you. And please also put the link to the film from Amazon. You can also drop that in the chat box as well, because I know I would love to see it. We got some major movers and shakers, y'all. People raising money for tiny houses. Those are things that you see on HGTV. Folks are doing films on Amazon. Listen, you are in for a power-packed panel. Let's move on to our next slide and our next panelist. My big brother, Eric Polk. Eric, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Thrive, for pulling this together. Just happy to really be on with, my friends and colleagues. Devin is, the slightly younger version of myself. I like that to think in a lot of ways. But Eric Polk here. I am a lawyer and deputy director at Georgia Equality. Georgia Equality is a statewide policy and advocacy organization focusing on LGBTQ issues and issues impacting communities of folks living with HIV and folks who are vulnerable to HIV. Just sort of in the space, my work has really centered on, making sure that there is a racial justice lens on all of this work. I think that we all know and can agree here that the LGBT movement space and the HIV movement space have in large part been very white. And also really void of real racial justice lens. And so I just really want to be able to share the work that we're doing here in Georgia to make sure that the voices of folks who are most impacted by these issues are really elevated. And so just really looking forward to being in conversation with my colleagues and friends here and, with folks who are joining us as well. So thank you again, and just happy to be in the space.
And shout out to Eric's headshot and looking on GQ. I see you. All right. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to our next panelist. Morris, another friend, let's not even get into it. Morris, just introduce yourself. We don't need to tell no stories, okay?
Please don't. My name is Morris Singletary. My pronouns, while sober, are he, him, and his. Afterwards, we never know. I am the executive director of the Positive Initiative, where I look to keep people who are HIV negative by educating them on PEP and PrEP. I also want to, for those who are HIV positive, I want to make sure that you are engaged or re-engaged into care. That's my passion. That's the nonprofit. I have the opportunity of sitting as the planning chair council of the Brian White Planning Chair Council for Atlanta, which is an amazing position to be in, especially at this time. During this conversation, I have the opportunity to speak about HOPWA. And in Atlanta, it is a crisis. So we will talk about what it is and, how we can move forward from there. But I really count it an honor to be in this space. Thank you, Thrive, for putting me in the midst of some good troublemakers.
Awesome. Thank you. Next panelist. My mentor, the incredible, the honorable Ronald Johnson. Please introduce yourself. I'm not worthy enough to introduce you. Introduce yourself. Are you there?
Yeah, I like so many of us, I forget to unmute myself. So
That's all right.
Thank you, Devin, and really am honored to be with you on this panel and the others who are all in a league of their own in terms of their accomplishments. I am, again, Ronald Johnson. I'm ostensibly retired. My last position was as Vice President for Policy and Advocacy at AIDS United. And I'm currently serving as the chair of the steering committee for the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. I am a person living with HIV and really happy to be a part of this incredible series that Thrive has put together.
Awesome, thank you. And Ronald's being really modest. Like, Ronald was at the start of the ACT UP movement, was in the streets, and as someone who's taken to the streets and also does public policy and understands the importance of that blend, I really just honor all of the work that Ronald has done over the years. And I'm happy that Ronald came into my life and has dropped so many gems that still serve me today. I believe that is our last panelist, is it not, Malcolm?
That is correct. We're ready to move.
All right. Well, let's get into it. Let's get into it, y'all. It's getting hot and heavy. Let's do it. All right. So we're going to kick it over to Sophia and Kyla so that we can talk about legislative ask and how that intersects with the demand for trans rights and trans dignity in this country and beyond. Take it away.
Thank you, Devin.
Of course.
So first, really helicopter overview of Positively Trans and what we do. We are a national constituent-led network of trans people and non-binary folks of color living with HIV or impacted by HIV and living with HIV and AIDS or impacted by HIV and AIDS. And we really believe that we can form our own networks, build our own narratives, come up with our own data and solutions to the isms and to the different challenges that we live daily as a community in the United States. And the way we do that, like our three, I like to call them sometimes our three superpowers, is community-led and driven data and research. Particularly around the social determinants of health for people, for trans, for TGNC people of color living with HIV, which is an easy way to think about it is just everything that goes on outside of the doctor's, let's say at a healthcare facility, the doctor's office. So everything that goes on in your life with employment, everything that basically impacts your quality of life. And so, like I said, community-driven research around the social determinants of health, storytelling, because we believe in the power of storytelling. And I believe Malcolm mentioned that one of the webinars is going to be about storytelling as a way to reclaim our narrative, reclaim our power. And the third way is leadership development and capacity building for our community. We have a board of around 20 leaders and a membership base of around 164 at the moment. And so we try as much as possible to engage and grow our skills and build. And for example, in opportunities like AIDS Watch, for example, we try as much as possible to not only have a physical or virtual, in this year's case, presence, but also be reflected in the content of the legislative asks, for example, in this particular instance, where thanks to the HIV, people living with HIV caucus, also thanks to, shout out to Ash Stevens, our policy coordinator at the Transgender Law Center. And with Ronald's help, we were able to redraft or revisit the legislative asks that were part of the advocate brief. So basically, when they go to the Hill, you know, we wanted them to have more asks that are more reflective of our community's needs than what was previously. Yeah, and I'll kick it to Kayla to continue.
Thank you, Sophie. Awesome. So yeah, I wanted to talk basically about specifically about the 1557 ruling and the amendments to HUD guidelines around trans identified bodies. So the ruling, I think we need to contextualize within our current movement, a global pandemic, a Black uprising, like how this adversely affects Black trans people in a time of crisis where the violence has steadily increased. This year alone, we've lost 26 Black trans femmes to violence. And we know that it's at the hands of the state because the federal government continues to roll back protections for us, as well as protections when it comes to things as simple as housing, Thank you for talking about our membership base and our board around this issue, because that is very critical. And like what we're doing today is we're empowering activists or any type of activism going on around housing and around trans folks, because being able to access a shelter or to be able to ignore trans people's gender identity and housing them according to what's listed on their birth certificate or their ID, or even their genitalia, and that's a common thing for trans folks to be asked about, is their genitalia. And now with this announced rule, the Trump administration is seeking to both expose trans people to violence, harm that they may experience within shelters, while also detering them from actually accessing homeless shelters because they're fearing being misgendered, or they're fearing violence, or they're fearing just being mistreated because of how they're showing up. trans people, particularly Black and brown trans folks, we face higher rates of discrimination when it comes to housing. And then when you compound that with someone who's living with HIV or who's vulnerable to HIV, it increases their expectancy. I mean, decreases their expectancy of life. And I know a lot of advocates within HIV are also advocating for continuum care, and housing goes with that. Before a lot of trans folks, even trans folks who are living with HIV or who are vulnerable to HIV, and there are readily available services to house those individuals, they're not being able to access it because of how they're showing up and people's personal biases. And Malcolm, if you can, I'm not good with time, so just like give me a ding or something to let me know I'm getting to my time. I don't want to go over.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you. All right, so in 2015, there was a survey that was done of more than maybe 25,000 TGNC people, and almost 30% of those people reported experiencing homelessness at some point in their life. And here in Memphis specifically, at my sister's house, we had a lot of our members who had never experienced homelessness until COVID-19 showed up, and then until the Black Uprising showed up and people were being laid off their jobs. People did not have access to unemployment benefits in a timely manner. And a lot of folks were transient, so they weren't staying somewhere where they had a lease and no one could put them out. So the moratorium on evictions didn't apply to them. And they found themselves experiencing homelessness, and we were at capacity and we could not like house folks here. And then some of our members were tested positive. They had tested positive for COVID-19, which put them in a whole nother predicament. They had to isolate themselves for 14 days. So we had to think like, what can we do in this moment that if this were to happen again, we would have something available for folks, or we would be able to remedy it. Because at the beginning of the year, our budget was $37,000, and that was all program dollars. None of that was for operational cost. So we had to really think fast, and the only thing we could think of was like, hey, let's do some crowdfunding to kick off this tiny house project, and it ramped up pretty fast. And I think it's because there's like this big, like, you know, fascination, one, with tiny homes, two, in this moment, you know, there's a lot going on around Black Lives Matter and All Black Lives Matter and Trans Lives Matter. And I think people feel obligated, and we should feel obligated to be able to take care of our community, because we all are community. And people showed up. That's what they did. They showed up with their funds, they showed up with their services, they showed up with their goods. And now we're here about to be able to provide home ownership to 20 people who society said we should never be homeowners. They said we should never be here. And a lot of those people are living with HIV and are vulnerable to HIV, and they're also extremely vulnerable to violence, especially in this state, this state that we're in nationally, globally. I definitely think this is a time for it. And as our moderator said, Devon, there's a lot of initiatives happening all over the South, all over the Midwest, where trans leaders are like, hey, we have to take the reins, and we can't wait for someone to, you know, actually provide this for our community. Because we've seen time and time again where we've had advocates like Ronald Johnson in California, who has advocated on several different occasions over decades for, you know, adequate housing for folks coming out of incarceration and coming out of substance abuse centers, to no avail, because it's either her work has been co-opted by cis folks, or those resources that were promised to our community specifically were not earmarked for our community in all actuality. Just on the surface it was. So we had to do things ourselves, and that's what trans people have always and historically have been doing, is doing things ourselves. That's how we came about the Stonewall riots. It's because Black trans femmes and brown trans femmes were like, we ain't having it no more. I'm not done with my refreshment. and we're going to continue this party. And that's how we are able to celebrate Pride. A lot of people ask me, how can you celebrate Pride in a time like this? And it's like, I'm trans. Like, you don't get any more prouder than this, because I walk out the door and it's on my face. It's just like being Black. You can't take it off, you know, even if you wanted to. It's who you are, and you can't do anything but be proud to be able to walk out the door every day. But a lot of folks, just to bring it back to my initial thoughts, a lot of people don't have doors to walk out of or doors to close and lock. And that's what we aim to do. And we're hoping that we can collect some data around how this has affected people's lives, you know, becoming a homeowner. I remember when I first became a homeowner, it was like, oh my Lord, I was ecstatic, but I was also like overworked because I had worked so hard to become a homeowner. And that was something that I didn't think would be possible. But my mother is a homeowner, and that showed me that Black women can own things, and that we can take care of things, and we can pass things on to our offspring or our family or our friends, our siblings. We can do that, and we can be greater than what they say that we are. And we don't have to wait for our government to actually make the change. We can exude the change. Right. And for our last subtopic. So a call to action, of course. So there's the HUD rule. It's up for, we can actually still comment on it up and through August, which is this month here. And basically what we're asking folks, you can actually go to our website, the Transgender Law Center.org, and you can submit comments through there, or you can actually go to the HUD website and you can submit comments there in opposition of this amendment to the HUD rule, because that's very critical. Right now in the South, right now in the South, trans people are already experiencing that. And I tell a lot of people that when things happen on the federal level, they normally don't trickle down to Black and brown trans folks in the South or in the Midwest. It just doesn't happen. Like with the protections in the workplace, you know, that's nice, but we aren't in the workplace. And if we are in the workplace, it's not in a position where you want to even fight about being terminated because you're transgender. It's not equitable. We're not equitably in the workplace. So a lot of the legislation that happens on the federal level doesn't necessarily trickle down, but it does send clear messages to local legislators that this is okay for us to implement this here in Memphis or in Atlanta or in St. Louis or Chicago. What is the HUD rule? So the HUD rule basically allows any entity that receives federal funding to discriminate against people who, specifically shelters, that's what we're talking about now, allows any shelter that receives federal funding to say, your shoulders are too broad, you have more masculine like features, and we can deny you services and there can be no repercussion for us and we won't lose any funding from the federal government. These were things that were put in place during the Obama administration. As we've seen these past 4 years, that this administration deems to take away all of those protections from us. I hope that that answers your question, Aunt Wilson. Yeah, so that's basically what the HUD rule is. It basically gives them rights to discriminate. And to go back to what I was just saying about that trickle down, that means nothing here in Memphis or in other places in the South and in the Midwest. Because a lot of organizations, and I'm just going to speak about here and things that I'm aware of, a lot of organizations are faith-based. A lot of organizations do not receive federal funding. A lot of organizations are funded through local and private donations and foundations and things of that nature. So those protections, they mean a lot because, like I said, it sends a message. If they're in place on a federal level, it sends a message to local legislators that, hey, we need to follow suit or we need to tighten up around what we're doing here in our locality. That I think that kind of gives you, if it doesn't, give me a thumbs down. Awesome. So as I was saying, that's what we're asking folks to do. There's still time for people to comment in opposition of this amendment to the rule. And it's very important, it's critical. And I also want to say this, that people think that this only affects trans folks, but it adversely affects a lot of other people as well. Because if we can't find housing, that means other things happen. And we don't have to really go into detail, but this affects us all. If I can't have housing, how can you enjoy your housing if you say that you're my ally? And what we're asking our allies to do in this moment, what we're asking other trans folks to do in this moment, is to take a few moments and comment and say, this is not fair. This is not how trans folks should be treated. And people can always reach out to myself or Sophie or anyone at the Transgender Law Center if they need any specific directions or guidelines around commenting as well. And I will definitely put a link in the comment. Oh, like somebody may have already done it, but I can put a link in the comment to the rule and its amendment and any other information that I think will be relevant to what me and Sophie have presented today. And again, I want to thank Thrive SS and Malcolm for allowing us to be here today and speak in this series.
Thank you so much for that incredible information, and also the work that you all are continuing to do in defense of the lives of trans people, particularly trans people of color. Malcolm, do we have time for a few questions for this group of panelists, or should we move forward to our next?
Let's see if we can get some questions answered. I know there were a couple of there was a question about the HUD rule. I think Kayla answered that.
Yep.
But just as long as we get, and I'll try to get the link as to where you can provide public comment. Public comment is very, very important. We know that, and I think Marco's going to bring it up in his presentation, there was a public charge rule that received so much public comment that they haven't repealed it, but they have gone back and said, hey, we may need to take a look at it. So public comment does work. And so if we can get that link and get folks to make public comment out there, that would be huge.
Awesome. So to our two panelists, can you talk with me a little bit about what it means to be working in defense of Black trans lives and the lives of trans people of color in this political moment that we are in right now, with uprisings, racial uprisings related to police brutality? We know that trans people, particularly trans women, find themselves a double-edged sword, where they are impacted by the brutality of the police while also being impacted by the brutality that can exist within community, inter-community conflict. We also know that trans folks are impacted, by the ways in which our medical system does not necessarily center their health. And we also are now definitely seeing that in housing, particularly during a time when we're asking people to shelter in place as best they can during a pandemic. What does all of this mean politically right now, especially given that this is happening during an election year? And if you all could answer that in like 2 minutes, that would be great.
I can give it a shot. Sophie, please help me out. In this moment, I think a lot of folks are experiencing a lot of different things because, like you said, that's a lot to deal with. You got COVID-19, you have the Black uprising, you got people telling you to shelter in place and you have no shelter. And then you have amendments to a rule that's saying you have access to this shelter, but you're also none of it makes sense. But I think through it all, we see there's a light, and there's a way, and there's a vision that's being like crafted from all of the chaos that's around us. And I don't think it's any different from like any other movement that we've had historically, whether it's ACTA, whether it's the civil rights movement. I think we're tackling it as best as we can with the resources that we have. And as we know, trans communities, especially Black and brown trans communities, we lack resources. Our resources are not, resources aren't directed, like equitably given out, in a sense that you get more because you need more. And for trans folks in this moment, we do need more, but we're still not getting that access. And Sophie, if you want to add, I don't want to take both minutes. You can go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, you know, from my perspective, you know, as a person of color, non-Black person of color, we have an Arabic proverb that says the person who's getting the stick or getting hit is not like the person that's counting them and spectating. So basically to say that, you know, my like where I see our role or my role in this is really keep like big ears, trying to big my ears as much as possible, keeping an ear to the ground, and really act as a resource referral hub, or you know, from our position at Positive Chance or from our position at TLC, coordinate resources and help it go through to the people who are interested in it or need it or something like that. Yeah. But I wanted to give it to you more if you wanted to talk more about that topic.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Do we have any other questions from either other panelists or participants via the chat box before we move forward to our other panelists?
And if the panelists have a question, they may need to come off of mute because I muted everybody.
Okay. So I was going to, in the defining of HOPWA, I was going to define what HOPWA was and how we're all affected, but I want to go directly to, I think, Kayla, you brought up something very, very specific, and I'm going to be mentioning COVID care, the COVID Care Act under HOPWA. But during the first week of shelter in place, I'll never forget, our mayor said to be, that we had a curfew at 9 o'clock. A curfew for me at 9 o'clock is one thing, but a curfew for a person that has no home who's already living on the street, their 9 o'clock curfew started at 7 a.m., started at 8 a.m. Like, there is no such thing as curfew for someone who is living on the street, which is why HOPWA is so very important, and the way that it is, everything that's happening is important with it. Now, in different areas, HOPWA is, and I'm not going into my area. I'm just answering this one question, correct?
Yeah, you're just answering this one question.
Okay, all right, good. All right, I didn't want to go too far. So when we look at what's happening with COVID, when we look at what's happening with HOPWA and the distribution of money and how it is and isn't going, this is why it's important for our activists and our advocates to know who in your city, who in your area is to be spoken to know when the next meetings are, because your public comment is so very important. It may change things. That may change things. It does change things. And I'll leave it right there. That way I won't go too far. I don't want to monopolize the time, and I want to make sure I take full opportunity of mine when we get to HOPWA. But thank you guys for mentioning that, especially during this COVID time. Again, you can't tell me to have a curfew at 9 o'clock when I'm on the street already. It doesn't work like that.
Exactly. Thank you, Morris.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our first two panelists. Continue to do incredible work in defense of trans people, and we will continue to be in solidarity and stand in support with you. As you can see, there are some legislative asks that I believe are requests that we should all hold ourselves accountable to in the ways in which that we can support. And some of those asks are pressuring your member of Congress to hold hearings and hearings where they release reports on the increased violence against trans women. And I would add to that those hearings and reports should also connect to how this administration is empowering the violence against trans women through policy and rulemaking, like the HUD rule, where we saw, that this administration was essentially giving guidance to housing providers on how to discriminate against trans people. And so it's really important to have those hearings, but also hold it in comparison to what the administration is doing so that we can see a direct connection between the administration's policy and the violence that takes place amongst trans women in our streets and trans people. Also, one of the other acts that we should be holding ourselves accountable to is supporting legislation that creates funding opportunities for community-based organizations that specifically are led and supported and envisioned by trans people. So there's no reason why Kyla should not receive money from the city of Memphis to support, to match whatever goal it is. I think it was about $350,000, that the city of Memphis should be matching that, so that you can buy more mini homes for members of the trans community in the city of Memphis. And then the last thing is ensuring that we oppose and work to stop proposed rules and reverse final rules that deny or weaken protections for transgender people. And so again, those rules are reflected a lot at the federal level with this administration, because as we can see, this administration is engaging in some activities that really is trying to invoke cultural wars that were already smoldering through the country. And this administration is absolutely empowering and emboldening that for political points, while people's lives are hanging in the balance. So those are three things that you can hold yourselves accountable to. I'm sure there's more that Kyla and Sophia could offer. And I encourage folks who are panelists and participants to connect with our two panelists and find more ways in which that we can stand in solidarity and support their ongoing efforts. We appreciate you. We love you. Thank you for your continued work on behalf of transgender people and on behalf of humanity. Thank you. Let's go to our next presenter. Marco.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you. I'm going to put myself on mute and I'm going to dead my camera, and we're going to give you the floor, Marco. By all means, take it away.
Thank you so much. I wanted to first start by acknowledging that I am speaking to you from a stolen land of the people in Nevada, a territory that it used to belong, or it belongs still, to the Washoe people. And I wanted to appreciate them, uplift them, and acknowledge that I am actually in their land, occupying their land that was stolen to them. I also wanted to center myself as someone who truly believes in popular education, which means that I don't think that I'm any better than any of the people that are actually listening or watching us right now, or my colleagues in this panel. I am so grateful that I'm able to actually speak to our communities, because, and I want to start by telling you a story, because I think that immigration is one of the biggest issues in this country that has been unresolved for so long. And I want you to get to know somebody who's an immigrant. And so I am an immigrant who came to this country in the mid-90s. And I grew up in Sinaloa, in Mexico, in a little fishing village. My father was a fisherman, and my mom was a teacher, a rural teacher who worked up in the mountains in the Sierra Madre for many, many years. She taught me the values of social justice, and my father taught me how to be appreciative. And but then I learned very early age that I was different, that I didn't know what I was, but I was a queer person. And so I left and I went to Monterrey, Mexico, which is in the east side, all the way to the east, to study. And I studied medicine and I studied communications. I was very good in school, so I was ahead. But in the last year of my college in communications, I was standing outside with a friend of mine, and I came out to each other. And we were the only, I was the only person that knew that I was gay. Back then, I identify as gay. Now I identify as queer. And we could not dare ourselves to go into the clubs, into the gay clubs. So to be close to that world, we will just go and stand outside the clubs. We will park our car and we will just stay there trying to hear music. I don't know what we're doing. But one night, two policemen basically picked me up and took me in the truck. They kidnapped me and they took me outside the city for almost 2 hours. I drove with a gun to my head and a big boot that it was kicking me from time to time. I learned all kinds of things that these two folks were talking about. And eventually I was brutally sexually attacked in this ditch full of mud several times. And I also was, they beat me very, 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 very difficult, very, very, just horrible. At some point when they were kicking me, I realized in that moment that they were trying to kill me. And so what I did is that I played dead. And somehow these two men stopped kicking my head, and they left eventually. I stayed there for a couple of hours until I was just at that moment when things like that happen to you, you just don't really know. But I always remember that I thought, oh, they're trying to kill me. So when they left, I basically was left naked in the middle of a ditch at night, really late. I walked as much as I could and found a house where I asked for some help. I never called the police. I never told anybody. I went to a friend's house and I healed from my wounds, my physical wounds. And I left, and I didn't went to my graduation party. I didn't do anything. My life completely changed. And I never really thought to come to the US before, but after going around Mexico in my car, I ended up in San Francisco in the mid-90s. And in San Francisco, I started working on HIV right away. I was an HIV educator. I used to do guerrilla theater in the mission, and we would teach people how to use condoms in the metro station and in Spanish. And I was doing prevention work, but in 1999 I was diagnosed with HIV, and I was very disillusioned with the prevention or the preventive efforts. I left HIV because I never really saw myself reflected in those prevention efforts, and I started working with queer youth. Then I did some media, and then I ended up at Lambda Legal in LA. From San Francisco to LA, I created my film at the same time that I was working at Lambda full time, and my film is about Latino immigrant fathers who love their queer children, and the coincidence of life is that my father actually became very ill when I was editing the film, so I had to go to Mexico several times, and I ended up staying there for a couple of months. I edited my film in the hospital next to my dad, and we were able to talk about my gayness or my queerness for the first time ever. Although he told me that he knew everything about myself because my mom would tell him. And my father and I were able to actually, our relationship throughout my life wasn't totally smooth, but I love him very much. And he loved me too. My film had to be shown in San Francisco in Frameline. And my dad passed away 3 days before my film was shown. So I dedicated the film to my dad, and in a very magical way, I think my film became very much embraced by communities here in the US and everywhere. And I'm telling you all of this, which has nothing to do with detention and immigration, but I think that is important for us. When you see, I came to this country and I asked for asylum. So when this president started acting and attacking the caravans that were coming to this country, and I remember vividly the one in San Diego where they gas people, they like in the civil rights movement, they use those water pipes. I saw children and family running away and being hit by this water, and at that moment, I felt really, really, really horrible because when I see the injustices that immigrants, especially those that are running away from violence, or the economic breakdown that this country actually is the responsible for that in Central America or South America or the rest of the world, this imperialistic country goes and decimates economies, and people then come over here and we actually attack them. So when I see that, I just think about, what if it was me? You know, I wasn't able to see myself in the mirror from the waist down for about 3 years. Up until today, I deal with PTSD in a way that I cannot sleep because I dream or I have a nightmare with this attack, and you cannot relieve it, and it's very difficult. The people that come to this country as immigrants, we don't come here to take anybody's job. We don't come here to cause trouble. We are not rapists. To the contrary, the president is the one who is a rapist. And so we come here because this country has advertised to the world the American dream and how great it is. And I came to realize that it was basically a double standard society that doesn't value diversity as they appear to, and that what it is that there is this individuality in this country where where affects us so much because other people in other parts of the world, we work in a different way. We do better in groups, at least Latinx people do. And so I every time that I see these attacks, and Malcolm, can you tell me when I have like 2 minutes, because I will talk a little bit about this. I just wanted to just, thank you. I wanted to just say that every time that I see those attacks against trans sisters, the people that have died in detention centers, people living with HIV, transgender women, children, the way that the detention centers and the immigration system works in this country, it makes me think about when I was really struggling in my life a lot more than now, and I found the asylum, and I came here. I had to write this declaration, 9-page declaration of what happened to me, and it took me 9 months to actually do that. That's how painful it is. So when you come here to this country, and every time that you come to go through the airport, and people feel the right to inquire everything about your life, including why did you apply for asylum. I went to Geneva to speak at the UNH a year ago, and in December I came back to this country, and I was in San Francisco. So somehow I was I was basically detained and I was interrogated. They asked me, how did I become HIV positive? They asked me if I was a terrorist. They asked me if I was a drug dealer or a drug addict. They stopped me there for about 4 hours, and I had the credentials of just the day before I just spoke to the United Nations on mental health. And so in sum, I just want to say that my big goal for this for this conversation that I'm having with you is for you to get to know what an immigrant looks like and the life of an immigrant like myself, so you can then have some empathy, and be an ally of immigrants in this country. And I wanted to just say that embracing human rights is really important, because civil rights doesn't include people like undocumented immigrants. And so I'm gonna stop very quickly, but I want you to understand that the reason because I do human rights and I work for undocumented immigrants specifically is because I believe that we all are equal, and that when we are born with those human rights. And this country has committed to actually enact all of those human rights, and it has done the opposite. This country, my call for action to you, and I'm sorry that I didn't go through the immigration, specifically in detention, but I think that it's important for you to get to know immigrant people. And I'm just gonna tell you a little bit of the demands, and I'm gonna end with a quote that is very important about human rights. So the demands on immigration right now that I think more or less are current is enact a comprehensive immigration reform. Some people call it the 21st century immigration reform. Also protect due process of law for all immigrants detained by law enforcement or immigration authority. Detention was actually, the people that are in detention centers are not criminals. They are people that are asking for asylum most of the case, and that's a civil procedure. And yet people have been detained there forever, trapped to get COVID-19, which I find it completely ridiculous and so unjust. The third demand is to ensure that high access to high quality healthcare for immigrants who have been detained. And I will go a step further and say that what we need is universal healthcare for everybody. Everybody in this world should, if you get sick, and if you're a human being and an animal for that matter, you should have the innate right to care. Because like Kyla was saying, how come you are going to be okay to receiving healthcare if I'm not receiving healthcare? You know, it's important that we all think about that, and that we actually have the power to change that. The last is repeal the public charge rule. The charge rule was basically this ridiculous rule that was created a long, long time ago, where what it did is that they changed in the actually description of the public charge rule, they changed the word people for immigrants. And that's how they changed that rule. And so it affects all of people that are trying to, if you are going to ask for citizenship or for to be a resident of any state, and if you have had ever request any support from the state, that will count against you. And so you won't be able to get any status. Can you imagine all the immigrant people that are undocumented right now that have gone through the COVID-19 struggle, nightmare that this country has created for us actually, and that they have not got any stimulus help, any aid, and they are unemployed? How is it that on top of that, we're going to give them this punishment for trying to get food for their children, for example? So think about the implications of the incredibly racist, xenophobic laws that this country has, and elevate your activism and your advocacy to a human rights level. And to finish, I'm just going to read to you the Black people, actually. Black people in the 40s and the 60s were the folks that actually started to actually utilize the human rights framework for their fight. And I wanted to say, I wanted to just end this part of my presentation with a quote that Malcolm X said in February 6th of 1965, which was 2 years before I was born. He said, as long as your problem is fought within the American context, all you can get as allies is fellow Americans. As long as you call it civil rights, it's a domestic problem with the jurisdiction of the United States government. But when you call it human rights, it becomes international. And then you take your troubles to a world context or to a world court. You can take them before the world, and anybody, anywhere on this earth can become your ally. So that is my presentation for today. I appreciate my colleagues. I appreciate Malcolm so much for his work. And I send all my love to the people in the South, especially those folks in Atlanta. Thank you.
We appreciate all the love in Atlanta. Thank you, Marco. And again, as a product of an immigrant family from Jamaica and Trinidad, I appreciate you echoing the demands and the needs for immigrants, regardless of their status, to be safe in this country, because we are all immigrants in this country. And this country doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to all of us. And yeah, one of the other things I would add is, if you live in a local community, find out if your local police cooperate with Immigration Custom Enforcement Authority, also known as ICE. One of the calls as a member of the Movement for Black Lives that we have a very clear demand is the abolishing ICE. Because they engage in a lot of unlawful activity. There is no due process. They feel as though they can treat undocumented people any type of way. And if you're undocumented and you have the other descriptors in this country that make life difficult for you, like being undocumented and Black, being undocumented and LGBTQ, being undocumented and living with HIV, those difficulties become tenfold. So ensuring that your local police departments are not cooperating with ICE authorities is also a demand that you could be making of your city council member, of your mayor. Currently here in the city of Atlanta, activists, myself and several other activists made a very clear demand to the mayor here a few years ago to end our contract with ICE to hold undocumented people at our city detention center. And to her credit, she did cancel that contract. And so we no longer hold undocumented people in our city detention center on behalf of federal immigration authorities. Marco, yes.
Just very quickly, Devin, I also wanted to uplift the work by the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights.
Absolutely, yes.
And the work that my sister Estrella is doing as well there, grassroots. And I also wanted to alert people that I was a fellow for the U.S. Human Rights Network, and they actually are the group that works on human rights. This year was the periodic review for the UN reviews every year different countries, and it's called the Universal Periodic Review. And this year is the year that the US is going to be reviewed for the UN nations. So if people go to the US Human Rights Network webpage, you can then link to and read all of the different organizations, including trans people, immigrant people, Black folks. Basically, we created reports, and we are hoping that the US is going to be held accountable for their commitment to human rights. And we know that this country has gone the opposite side the past 4 years, that we have gone backwards. But I also wanted to say that for people that don't lose your hope, vote this November and make sure that if you don't vote, you make tamales, you drive people to the polls, do whatever you can to support the process. People that are undocumented are involved in the electoral movement, and we are also people like everybody else. So if you're fighting for something that you think you deserve, then everybody deserves it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marco. So we're going to move things forward. If you do have questions, drop them in the chat box and we'll tag in our panelists towards the end, but we want to get through all of our presentations. So
hey, Devin, let me just jump in one quick second.
Yes.
For the participants, one of the things about this program is that, as I mentioned, this is a learning experience. We send out a pre-engagement survey this morning, as I mentioned, and to Devin's point about know what your police chief is doing, know what your police departments are doing. One of the questions that we ask is, do you know who your police chief is? Do you know who your DA is? Do you know if they were appointed or if they were elected? And it's important that you know that information as well as what they're doing, because that allows you to know how to make change. So I just I thought it appropriate to make that point now so that people understand why we ask those questions, because we're here to inform and let you know later on in the course how to find that information out and where to go. So thank you.
Thank you for that. So let's move on to our next panelist. Eric, take it away.
All right, and so I have big shoes to follow. Everyone's, really talking about some, very important and critical work that's happening and needs to happen. So just really thankful again to be here with my colleagues. And so want to talk with folks just about HIV criminalization and HIV criminalization laws. And so I think a good place for us to start really is just around how we define HIV criminalization. And so the definition that I like to use is that HIV criminalization is the arrest, prosecution, and imprisonment of people who are living with HIV for things that are perfectly legal or only minor crimes for people who have not tested positive. In other words, HIV status is used as a standalone basis to single out people living with HIV for unique and discriminatory treatment by our criminal legal system. And so I always like to start out with just, really framing this around that definition. I also like to talk about HIV criminalization in a more broader context around criminalization that's happening in other areas. And so, I think that we should be thinking about and talking about HIV criminalization from the vantage point of broader communities around criminal justice reform that I think that we're starting to have, but that people have been talking about for a while. And so HIV criminalization is a part of this sort of greater system around policing and surveilling, folks here in this country, especially folks who are Black and brown. And so HIV criminalization, some of the kind of key problems with the laws are, one, there's no mens rea requirement. And so mens rea is really just intent. So most prosecutors have to prove intent in a case. And so there's no requirement to prove intent under most HIV criminalization laws. HIV criminalization laws also rely on grossly inaccurate and stigmatizing characterizations of HIV, about modes of transmission, about the likelihood of transmission. And so these laws are really fueled by stigma and continue to drive stigma. I think one of the things that's really important to keep in mind, most HIV criminalization laws are about non-disclosure. And so it's not about transmission, but it's about a person living with HIV not disclosing their status. And so what this does is it creates additional barriers for people around getting tested. And so just another sort of byproduct of these really sort of bad policy decisions. And then the other sort of thing that I think is really important about and why, you know, these HIV criminalization laws are so bad and problematic is that they have extreme and disproportionate penalties. And so here in Georgia, a person who's convicted under the statute can receive up to 10 years in prison. It's a felony offense. And so we're talking about not disclosure, transmission usually doesn't happen in most of these cases. And so the injury is not in line with the punishment. And so again, another reason why these laws are really problematic. And so here in Georgia, the Georgia HIV Justice Coalition, we have been working for a number of years around reforming the HIV criminal laws here in Georgia. And just a little bit around sort of reforming while we're having a conversation about reform as opposed to getting rid of HIV criminalization laws, is really around the fact that if we're able to reform laws in such a way, it kind of puts a gate around what people and how people will be charged. So in states where there aren't HIV criminalization laws, people are charged under things like attempted murder. And so having laws on the books that are reformed allows for us to put some guardrails in place around how people are charged under these laws. And so just want to point that out as a reason that we're kind of talking about reforming the laws as opposed to just completely getting rid of them. And so part of our work in Georgia has been really around data gathering. And so it's really important for us sort of in the process of working with elected officials, with legislators around making sure that we have data around who's impacted. And, you know, the fact that these laws really don't achieve the goal, which is to reduce HIV transmissions. And so we partnered with the Williams Institute out of UCLA to really do some of this work around collecting data. And so what we found were disparities in the enforcement of HIV criminalization laws based on geography, based on race, based on sex worker status, that were really important. And so I think really important in the conversations that we're having about criminal justice reform and around the people who are impacted. And so the Williams Institute data showed that Black men and women are most likely to be criminalized under these laws. So 46% of the folks who are arrested under the HIV criminalization law here in Georgia are Black men, and 16% of the folks are Black women. So we're talking about 62% of the folks who are arrested under HIV criminal laws here in Georgia are Black folks. When there is a concurrent offense, Black men are more likely to be charged for the HIV-related offense than white men. And we know that folks who are engaged in sex work are oftentimes more likely to be charged under these laws as well. And so we also know the impact on trans communities, on Black trans communities, though, again, a problem with our system is that we don't collect that data. And so one of the big pushes has been around data collection so that we can also be able to fully sort of illuminate how trans folks are impacted by these laws as well. And so the Williams Institute has also worked with Florida, with California, which recently reformed their law, and with Missouri, on making sure that those states also have data. And so what you see across the board is that it's Black people who are mostly impacted by these laws. And so it's really important then for us to have a racial justice lens on what this work looks like, and really important for us to be working across movement spaces to really talk about this as an issue that's critical to criminal justice reform most broadly. And so there have been other states recently who have had some reforms. Michigan and North Carolina are two of those states. And, you know, I think that we want to be very careful about what our reform efforts look like around legislative reform. In North Carolina, they were able to reform the law there where if a person has an undetectable viral load, they can't be charged under these laws. That becomes very problematic when we think about, you know, the folks who are able to achieve sustained viral load, undetectable viral load, and those who are not. And so that's going to be largely skewed along the lines of race. And so we don't want to create this sort of viral divide, you know, where folks who are living with HIV who can obtain viral suppression have, you know, greater access and are treated differently under the law than those who can't achieve viral suppression. And so just one of the sort of nuances and really considering what some of the reform needs to look like in these laws. And if you're working in states, you know, that maybe is a consideration that you would have around what reform looks like in your state. And so we've been working, like I said, here in Georgia on reforming the law. And so House Bill 719 was our reform effort here in Georgia that actually passed through the House with bipartisan support this year. And so the changes that were made to our statute through this bill, it didn't pass, but the changes were really to eliminate needle sharing from the bill. Needle sharing was one of the potential charges that could be brought against folks. There's a piece of the bill that talks about, or the statute that talks about solicitation and sex work. The bill that we're proposing would eliminate that piece. It would also eliminate the piece around donating blood or organs, and it would eliminate penalties around spitting or biting peace officers or corrections officers, which is another sort of piece that's in the statute currently. It would also change the language around exposure. And so it would move away from exposure and the language would be intent to transmit. So at the top of this, I talked about there not being an element of intent. And so what we put forth as a coalition would reform the law so that that language around intent would be included. And so the other piece of this is just around the felony piece. And so ideally, any piece of legislation would also get rid of the felony charge. What we had proposed was a misdemeanor. And so that's another piece, I think, that in sort of the coalition work that folks would also want to make sure that they're thinking about and elevating is that, you know, ideally we want to, you know, not criminalize folks at all. And this should definitely not be a law where a person would have a felony, which, as we all know, sort of like lives with you and creates additional barriers. And so just around sort of the advocacy piece, our efforts in large part have been around just reforming the law. So, you know, there is sort of the legislative route of reform, litigation. And so in some states where reforming the law may not be on the table. There are organizations, previously I was at Lambda Legal, that work really on litigation strategies to really try to bring the case that these laws are unconstitutional. And so that's really, a longer term strategy around impact litigation. What we're doing now in Georgia is working with prosecutors and targeting prosecutors to ask them to not bring charges under the HIV criminal law here in Georgia. And so part of that has been really through our work with folks who are running for re-election, and getting them on the record about not bringing charges if they are elected or re-elected to these offices. And so that's another sort of strategy. I just sort of add to that, also just making sure that we are electing, prosecutors, judges, and sheriffs who have a level of competency around HIV to also, make better choices as well. And then the last sort of piece is really just around stigma reduction. These laws are really based in stigma, and stigma is what drives and fuels all of this. And so I think, a lot of our work is just around reducing stigma in communities and with folks. And so that, I think, is another real strategy for us to implement. We can change the laws, but we also have to change hearts and minds. And so I think that is an important part of what any of our advocacy strategies look like. And so I'll stop there to make sure that we have plenty of time to get other folks in. But that's just a little bit about what's happening here in Georgia around HIV criminalization reform, and just some broader thoughts and ideas about what reform may look like in other spaces.
Thank you, Eric. We appreciate the thorough presentation. And also, we in Georgia, if you are listening to this and you live in Metro Atlanta, we have runoff elections that are taking place this week. And one of the races that's on the ballot is for district attorney. And so that for Fulton County, which is the largest county in Georgia. And so folks should get educated on who those candidates are. I don't know who you should support. Don't ask me, because I really am just at a loss that this is who we have running for district attorney, but we have to make a decision nonetheless. So I'd encourage folks to read up on the candidates, and you have today, tomorrow, and next week, Tuesday, to vote in this election.
And Devin, I will add that both candidates for Fulton County DA have said that they would not bring charges under the statute. And the current DA who's running for re-election did say that he feels that these laws are unconstitutional. And so just merely on that thing.
Right. Yes, I was remiss to mention that we do have a district attorney that we have a policy that we don't prosecute HIV criminalization cases in Fulton County, and it is promising that his challenger is willing to make that same commitment. So that means you have to vote on other reasons. Which makes choosing them really difficult because they're both a mess. But anyway,
I will say that Thrive is a 501c3. So
absolutely. So these are my political beliefs. Yes. My political beliefs. These are not the political beliefs of the organization. Yes.
Devin, this is Marco. Very quickly, I wanted to appreciate the work that Eric is doing. I was one of the lead organizers for the efforts on decriminalization in California. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to just ask the people in the audience to please get involved in this struggle, because there's a lot of misinformation, and not many people know that the struggles that people go through. People living with HIV should not be worried about going to jail. They should be worried about their health and their wellness. So if you guys could join Eric's efforts on the criminalization of people living with HIV in the state of on Georgia, it will be greatly appreciated, because it took 3 years for us to do this, and I'm sure that Eric knows that it's going to be a struggle, but it's possible. That's all.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next presenter. And just to keep folks, we've got about 20 minutes left. So, you know, do with that with what you wish, but we've got 20 minutes left on this call.
Awesome, amazing. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Devin. I am Morris Singletary. I am a 43-year-old Black gay man in Atlanta. I am a church boy. Some may say church queen. So it just depends on how you're feeling and where you at. And I am living with HIV. I said all that to say this. I know that we are speaking to activists and advocates. And so all of that is what I bring with me when I am advocating, why I'm being this activist. And it's super important because it makes the work easier for me. I always tell people, yes, I'm doing the work, but I'm also fighting for myself. And this is what I would like to encourage you to do as activists and advocates, is to fight for yourself as well while you're doing this work. Now, I have the awesome and amazing responsibility, and thank you, Thrive, for this, to speak about HOPWA. Now, I jumped into the activist game and advocate game really, really fast. And so people were saying all these acronyms, and baby, I can't tell you what some of them still mean. And I stopped and I asked people to define them. And I want to start that with this. What is HOPWA? HOPWA is housing opportunities for people with AIDS, okay? Again, it stands for Housing Opportunity for People with AIDS. Now, this is the way it works, and I'm going to talk about the process here in Atlanta. It's federal dollars that come down, and they send them to the city of Atlanta. The city of Atlanta is supposed to disperse them to the agencies, and the agencies do the work, all right? That's what's supposed to be happening. And if you know anything about Atlanta and HIV, housing has been a complete mess. Now, I want to put a pause right here. One of the things that I spoke about in my nonprofit is we want to make sure that people are engaged in care or re-engaged into care. Now, people think that care is just taking the pill and just going to the doctor. No, going into care is financial care. And in this case, we want to talk about housing care. How many people know that if you don't have anywhere to lay your head, taking a pill don't mean nothing, right? And so this is why HOPWA is so very important, the programs that follow under HOPWA. I would like to explain to you at this time what has happened in the city of Atlanta. Agencies are doing the work. They are putting people in housing. They have done all that they can do up until now. Morris, why can't they do it now? Well, the federal money that is supposed to be dispersed to them has not been given to them. There have been reasons, there have been promises, and to the day, I know that Aid Atlanta has received some of the funds, and there are other agencies that are waiting to get the funds. Now, they've spent their own funds, which means they are supposed to get reimbursed first, and then they'll be able to do more work. So let's talk about what's happening right now with HOPWA and COVID, right? Because what you have is people who are needing to be housed and stay housed, and the city hasn't given them money, and now we have COVID money here, and the COVID money has been dispersed a little bit differently. Morris, why is that? Because it came through a different mechanism of disbursement. Now, with that being said, the agencies and people who are doing the work with those of us who are living with HIV, we're looking to see if the state of Georgia can do the disbursement of HOPWA funds. Now, that will not be an immediate kind of a change, which means, so Morris, you mean to tell me that Positive Impact Health Centers may be able to get funded their $1.9 million? Baby, I can't tell you that, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're doing this right and we don't have this problem anymore, right? Now, I want to encourage people who are on HOPWA to know this. Just because you're on HOPWA, it does not mean that you don't qualify or cannot apply for other housing subsidies that are provided by the United States government, right? Section 8, block grants, home investment partnerships. If you qualify for that, you may also see if you qualify for those funds so that you can get housing as well. Now, while COVID is going on, many people know that there has been a moratorium, I'm saying the wrong word. They can't put you out. That's the bottom line. You cannot get evicted under COVID, right?
Moratorium.
That's the word. Thank you.
Yup. You know I'm gonna help you out, friend.
I appreciate you. Now, that ended on July 24th. Today is August the 6th. That ended on July 24th. Today is August the 6th. I'm gonna say that one more time. That ended July 24th. That was last month. We are now into August 2020. And I want to do something very important. If you are looking at this and you are saying, well, Morris, what happens now? The courts will be opening up, and from my understanding, evictions will start August the 13th. That's in 7 days. If your rent has not been paid due to a HOPWA discrepancy, Legal Aid Atlanta will be there to help you out, and that number is 404-524-5811. Again, 404-524-5811. I want everybody to know that Legal Aid is ready, willing, and ready to help you at this time, should that come up. Now, listen, I want to make sure everybody understands this because we got to take some responsibility as people who live with HIV. Now, if you didn't pay your rent before March, don't think that COVID is going to cover you. If you weren't inside HOPWA and you wasn't paying your rent before, please don't think that that's going to be covering you. So I'm going to stop right here. We have one more amazing person that's going to do anything. But if you have any questions, please let me know through the chat and we can go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Morris. That was a great way to sum up the HOPWA issue in Atlanta. It has been an issue that has been persisting for years. And one of the most important things that was on the previous slide was to continue to engage city leaders around the issues as it pertains to HOPWA. One thing that I think that is really interesting, because all things are connected, is that we continue to hire more police in this city, even though crime rates have gone down consistently every year, but we continue to put less money and resources into HOPWA, and HIV rates have continued to go up every year. So Dr. King talked a lot about budgets needing to reflect the priorities of justice. If cities and states and governments want to show that they are serious about civil rights, and in the cradle of the civil rights movement, in the city that's supposedly too busy to hate, do not allow the city leaders to bastardize the civil rights movements or to pacify you with quotes from Dr. King and John Lewis that are taken out of context. And this is something worth getting in good trouble over. And so please connect with Morris and others around what it looks like for people living with HIV to demand justice as it pertains to their housing. And I think that is a perfect segue into my mentor, the incredible Ronald Johnson. Please take it away on the rights of people living with HIV.
Thank you, Devin. And I just want to, and I know we're reaching the time, so I want to go as quickly as possible. Next slide. When we talk about the rights of people living with HIV and all of the issues that we've been talking about and hearing about today, I think it's very important to ground our advocacy. And the two things that I would highlight are the Denver Principles, which were developed in 1983. And while some of the wording reflects the 1980s, they are still the clearest articulation and summary of the rights of people living with HIV. And I would certainly highlight the right to privacy and the right to die, which was what the reality in the 80s, but now the reality is to live and our right to live. And that's what our advocacy is definitely about. Also, the meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. And that is something we need to stress every day, everywhere, that we have as people living with HIV and as allies of people living with HIV, we have a right to be there, we have a right to speak out, and we have the right to have spaces that meaningfully engage us. Next slide. When we talk about advocacy, we want to highlight some priorities of molecular HIV surveillance, HIV and aging, and LGBTQ plus people. Next slide. Many of you have heard about, but still there needs to be more awareness about molecular HIV surveillance and the role that it's playing in ending the HIV initiative. Some of the concerns that we have about MHS are the issue of consent. Have we given consent to have our data used? The risks to data security and the invasion of our privacy. Next slide. Some of the things that we can do on advocacy is to make clear the guidelines for meaningful engagement. For the most part, public health departments, state health departments have been woefully inadequate in the task of engaging the community around molecular HIV surveillance and what it means. We need to advocate policies and procedures that ensure the protection of that data, and that, for example, it's not given to law enforcement and to get into the areas of criminalization that Eric pointed out to us. So we need to do more to increase the community's awareness of molecular HIV surveillance and the role it's playing in the epidemic and the role that it plays as people living with HIV who give without our consent our blood and the knowledge and the data from that on purposes that have nothing to do with ending the epidemic. Next slide. HIV and aging, as you can see from the graph, more and more of the portion of people living with HIV are going to be and are 50 years and older. Next slide. We know a great deal about HIV, but the needs and concerns of those of us who are older adults living with HIV are still being neglected. And too often we feel people who are living with HIV 50 years and older not only feel neglected, in many ways they are neglected. And we need sustained and focused and collaborative advocacy that ends that disconnect between what we know about HIV and aging and what is being done about HIV and aging. Next slide. So we need sustained advocacy and around medical care, mental health and substance abuse, housing, transportation and other support services, stigma and discrimination, including ageism. We need advocacy to make sure that ending the HIV epidemic plans reflect the realities of older adults and what that means for older adults, and the intersection between HIV policy and older adult policy in general. Next slide. We also think it goes without saying, but it needs to be repeated, to protect the rights of all members of the LGBTQ plus communities. Kayla and Sophia did a magnificent job on talking about transgender people and the needs that to protect transgender rights. We also need to demand that the Senate take up and pass the Equality Act, which the House passed. Many people might think that because of the recent Supreme Court ruling that the issue is dead, but it's not. The Supreme Court ruling only referred to employment discrimination. There are all other forms of discrimination, housing, healthcare, that also needs to be addressed, and the Equality Act does that. We need to demand the Senate pass that. We need to advocate state and local laws that protect LGBT individuals from stigma and discrimination. And we need to support the collection of data Sophia and Kayla also mentioned that how if we don't have data on transgender people, if we don't have data on the extent to which LGBT people are throughout our communities, then the policies don't reflect the reality. So we need to collect that data. Next slide. Finally, overall, we need to protect the rights of all people living with HIV. And as Audre Lorde pointed out, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle. And that's what was so great about today's presentations, the intersection of all these issues as they impact people living with and in jeopardy of becoming infected with HIV. We need to take that intersection into account. And the final thing I want to say, and we've said it before on this webinar, voting is HIV advocacy, and we need to make sure that we vote, our neighbors vote, our families vote, everyone who is eligible to vote votes. Our lives, in fact, depend upon it. Thank you.
And this is why Ronald Johnson will forever be my mentor. Not only did he drop gems, but he dropped gems in an incredible amount of time. That can only be done when you've been doing this, when you're not new to this, but you're true to this. And I believe that we truly save the best for last. Thank you for all of the work that you've done, Ronald, over the years in support and in defense of the lives of people living with HIV. We appreciate you. We do have 4 minutes for questions. 4 minutes for questions. So with that being said, we'll do rapid fire. If there are any questions that are with the folks who are still on as participants, or if there's anything that our last presenters want to just reiterate quickly. Again, the series will be taking place over the next 6 weeks. And so this was our kickoff, and we will have more information and more robust discussions for folks to share as well. And if we don't have any questions, we know how to get in touch with our panelists. And feel free to ask questions via their contact information. Our next webinar will be access to affordable healthcare. And my big brother, Eric Polk, will be presenting on that webinar. We know access to affordable healthcare is always important, but particularly important during a global pandemic. And so I think that will be a really important webinar, and we ask for folks to definitely participate and invite folks to attend as well.
And I'll just jump in and say thank you very much to all the presenters, and thank you, Devin. You did an outstanding job moderating, and I'm looking forward to more as we move forward. Again, the next webinar is the 20th, and then following that, we will have a webinar on the 3rd, on the 17th, and then our legislative sessions hopefully will be scheduled by then. We're working on those now. So if there are no more questions, I will let you guys go. Once again,
Malcolm? Really quick, I share a bunch of things to the panelists and not to the participants. And I also wanted to offer my phone for free. I'll send the link to you so you can send it to them. So
okay.
they don't have to pay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes,
because I wasn't sure if I wasn't sure if my Amazon membership was current. So
don't worry. I got you, David. Thanks so much for everything. It was a great presentation.
Thank you for all of you all, to all of our presenters. Thank you for your incredible work and your commitment to ending this pandemic. Not the new pandemic that people just jumped on the scene to, but the pandemic that has been plaguing our communities for the last 30 years. That's been impacting Black people and undocumented people and brown people and trans people and all of our people. But we will continue to fight this epidemic until it is no more and until all of our people are free and liberation is achieved in our lifetime. Have a wonderful Thursday afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Bye.